Okay, good morning. So what I'm going to try to achieve this morning is to try to give you some perspective as to where we are in the development of this innovation called blockchain. Super exciting what's happening, but I think that we need to position ourselves so that we understand where we are in this deployment. So my name is Leonard Boord. I'd like to thank the crew at Beacom and Niels for making this possible. I think that we're looking forward to 3 or 4 days of learning, of networking, and of exchanging ideas. And I'll be the first out here, but I look forward to hearing from all of you as the days progress. So everybody, I think that we all understand what the expectations are, right? Blockchain is revolutionary. Blockchain is going to change many things. It threatens a lot of incumbents, and it is going to create a lot of value along the way. But the question is, when will this happen? And to that effect, we all agree that this innovation called the decentralized trusted agent will become mainstream. We all have seen the S-curve analysis, and in the S-curve analysis, the first stage is those early innovators with 2.5%, but 2.5% of what? How do we measure the 2.5%? How do we measure the 10%? What is 10% of the marketplace that we aim to address? And that is what I'm going to try to explain, or try to give you some perspective here, is what does this S-curve adoption mean? So usually, if we look at the past, we've seen that innovations need a catalyst to massify them. You know, we call those catalysts killer apps. And if we want to understand the future, it helps to look a little bit at the past. And I asked myself, what was the killer app of the internet? And how did that killer app help massify the internet? So I think it's well known that the killer app of the internet was email. And although today in 2018, we sit as if email has been with us forever, it is interesting to note that just in 2010, 8 years ago, there were only 2 billion people, only is a big word, right? But there were only 2 billion people connected via email. And today, there's close to 4 billion people. So in the last 8 years, we've doubled the size of our marketplace. And as we look, we kind of collapse the past time. We make it appear much shorter than what it actually is. And most people, it is impossible to think of somebody right now that you say, give me your email, and they say, I don't have an email address. And some people, very, very few people can get away with that. But this didn't happen overnight. And I think it's important to understand how these innovations get rolled out. Where do our expectations match the deployment speed of the innovation? Sorry. So, doing a little bit of history. Now, 1965. So the protocol, the basic protocol of electronic messaging is experimented in 1965 at MIT. This is the foundational beginnings of email. By 1971, 6 years later, they understood that email was not just from one name to another, but they invented the concept of domain. Whereas inside of a domain, you can have repetitive first names. And that happened 6 years afterwards. And as we move through, between 1965 and 1988, 23 years, actually 33 years, no, 23 years, it's just very, very basic foundational development, right? So we see the email standards are adopted. In 1978, Eric Schmidt, the ex-CEO of Google, who was the ex-CEO of a company called Novell Networks, invented the first serial communications-based network. At one point, many of us thought that all those internal Novell networks would one day connect to each other, therefore forming the internet. And a lot of us were wrong at that time. But in 1988, 23 years later, Microsoft Mail is introduced. Now, how does that relate to where we are in the blockchain development and where we are with some of the underlying infrastructure needed to make this happen? Well, in 1983, something called DigiCash is invented. Does anybody know what that means? So David Chaum initiated and developed this. He had offers from Citibank, from ING. Microsoft wanted to buy the company and put it on every Microsoft Windows. And that was between 1983 and 1998, where the company went bankrupt. DigiCash was sort of a precursor to what we're seeing now. So, you start to add decades into the development and how these foundational layers get on top of each other and deliver what is today to us something very, very easy to understand. But if we go back to the chart here, in 1980, so the first 5 segments between 65 and 88 are foundational. And then in 88, we get Microsoft coming out. And competitors come out, CompuServe and Lotus Notes. In 1990, I didn't get your mail. It was so successful, but it was so unprotected that email was a very inconsistent product. We didn't know if we could get delivery of it at the time. So in 1992, a couple of years later, things get fixed. The industry gets together and starts to fix things. And we go to 1993, now almost 30 years later, and AOL seems like it owns the internet. That walled-in community was 50% of traffic, and everybody thought that everything would derive from there. Sort of like what Bitcoin is today, in the sense that it represents 50% of the value, and it appears to be the only survivor going forward, and it might be, but we don't know that yet. And think about this. In 2004, the most successful Gmail platform, almost 40 years after the basic innovation happens, becomes the largest platform, Gmail. Gmail was in private beta for 3 years. Today it has 1 billion users. So arriving late doesn't mean that you are last. Arriving late, fixing an innovation also creates opportunity. So basically the message was email took a long time to develop. A lot of things happened along the way, and I think that is going to be similar to what is going to happen on the blockchain. So if we look at the past and we assume that we need a catalyst, we need a killer app. What is the killer app of the blockchain? Our thesis is that the killer app of the blockchain is the wallet. Why? Email allowed us to eliminate a whole function of a third party, which was the post office. Some guy showed up at my door, gave me an envelope, took an envelope. I was able to become my own post office. With an electronic wallet, I am also able to send and receive value. It is that foundational. I no longer need an intermediary. I no longer need the postman. I no longer need whatever your intermediary is, if you have one, and many people do not have one, actually. So if the killer app is the wallet, where we will check it every day, we will see if we've gotten something or if our sends have happened, that interaction that happens every day, if that is the killer wallet, so how many wallets are there? I don't know. Nobody knows. There's lots of places where wallets can exist. But we can infer what the order of magnitude of the total population of wallets is to try to understand in that S-curve deployment, where do we sit? So if we look at we're going to call these wallets, they're more addresses, but if we look at the Bitcoin blockchain, we can see that there's 21 million of them. However, this number is a little deceiving because Coinbase has one or a number of addresses, but they have hosted wallets. And now we go back to the metaphor of email, the hosted wallets as opposed to hosted email. The hosted wallets can become an enormous multiplier. And those, we believe that the addresses inside here, many of them contain millions and millions of other wallets. So, including hosted wallets, does anybody have any idea what the order of magnitude, how many wallets, speculatively speaking, there are? So I'm going to try to put a little survey here. So how many people think that we are in the green box between 20 and 50 million wallets? This will also check your engineer. One person, okay? How many people think there were in the yellow box with 50 to 100 million wallets? One person. Well, then all the rest of you think that we're over 100 million? How many people think that the orange is the number? Okay, interesting. Okay. I don't think so. I think that we're closer. We are leaving the green, is what I think. And that's important because that's going to determine what the tipping point. What's the magic number at which wallets become mainstream form of payment? What's the tipping point for this particular innovation? It's an interesting question. At what point does not having a wallet become a problem? At what point do we all realize that this is inevitable? Just like it was with email. At some point, we got rid of the fax and we realized that nobody was going to send us a fax anymore, that everything was going to go through email. At what point can I consistently depend on my electronic wallet to make payments? Well, to determine that tipping point, I think it's easy. We have to look at other forms of payment to understand when this form of payment will become so compelling that commerce cannot ignore it. So if we can imagine the other forms of payment that, by the way, these numbers are surprising. If we look at the credit card penetration, you can go with an American Express and pay, not everywhere, but it's pretty consistent that you can pay in hotels and restaurants and many services. They only have 110 million accounts worldwide. And they established themselves as an acceptable global form of payment with 110 million customers. So think about that. When will commerce actually have to accept wallet payments? This table gives us an idea. MasterCard and Visa are around the 800 million unit number. Debits and credit cards. There's a lot of redundancy, by the way, because I think if you check your wallets, you're going to find out that you have more than one of these, so that these numbers don't add, but these numbers are, there is some redundancy. Debit and credit cards, about 1 billion, and checking accounts globally. Checking accounts provides an interesting metaphor. So in the 1980s, there were 1.2 billion fixed lines in the world. 1.2 billion fixed line phones in the world. Today, 40 years later, there are 1.2 billion fixed lines in the world. The number did not grow, it did not reduce, it stayed stagnant. There was a lot of churn. In 1980, there were 0 digital lines in the world. Today, there are 6 billion digital lines in the world. Capture that, from 1.2 billion analog world to 6 billion on the digital world. Well, there are 1.5 billion checking accounts in the world. 1.5 billion. And there are, some people say 100 million, I say 50 million electronic wallets. I think 30 years from now, there's going to be 1.5 billion checking accounts in the world, but there will be 6 billion electronic wallets. Now, remind you that on the bottom there's a 2.5 billion people who have no access to the financial system. Those people can get an electronic wallet because it's permissionless, it's borderless, it's almost free. So those are going to be our sources of growth once commerce widely accepts this. And that's the question. After you get to this point, which seller can afford not to do business with you because there's 400 million of us. So if that's the number, if that's the target number, where are we in the S-curve to understand the next steps of massification? Well, let's do a little analysis. I told you it was important to understand what that 2.5 or what that 10% meant in the target market. So if there's 5 billion internet users and 3.5 billion smartphones that are capable of carrying this technology, at 400 million wallets in the future, we will just be leaving the early adopter stage. So we still have a lot of runway to go. Don't think that this is going to happen overnight, because if we're at 50 or 100 million, and we need to quadruple the size of our wallet base, even as a quadratic function, it's going to take a little bit of time. So in these 5 stages, we are now in the innovator stage. We represent 2.5% or less of the target market. So the next stage would be those that we convince how cool this technology is. That's how we're going to get to the 12.5%. And then, once we get accepted, then those that resist change but are open-minded will follow us. Commerce will be available, and it becomes the same adoption curve. So what each of us needs to do is to promote the benefits of electronic wallets and of electronic payments. So if we are in the very early stages of this innovation, and we're a few years away from getting to the adopter stage, what are we doing now? Where are we? What do we call this stage? So let's ask the people who are betting with their money what this stage is. And if you look at this was a few days ago. If you look at this, all the money is concentrated where it should be. Infrastructure, platforms, and currencies. So if we go back in our internet metaphor a little bit, in 1980, the 3rd largest, most valuable company in the world was, does anybody remember? Cisco. Cisco was selling the piping for the internet. All the people that were trying to apply and sell application products did not have a user base yet. So it was all piping. This is the equivalent of that piping. We are now seeing platforms, and if we look around, that's what we're going to see, a lot of platform development, currencies that form the foundations so the adoption can happen so that the dApps can occur. And that's what we need to understand when we're thinking about investing in this innovation, is that we are a few years away from applications to really grabbing hold. There's just not enough users. So anything that has any network effect has a severe challenge for adoption because the number of users there just aren't there yet, but it will happen. So the conversation was about investment, and I think that it's important to understand when you see offerings, when you see opportunities, what to focus on, or that you need to understand that it's going to take a few years before those applications that depend on network effects grab hold. So in conclusion, we are building infrastructure. If you launch an app, it'll be a few years, and just be patient. It will happen. Being that we started late, I've shorted my presentation by 10 minutes, but if there are any questions, I'd love to handle them.
We'll get a second microphone. Go ahead. I'll
Yes. Hello. Hello. Yes. Talking about infrastructure, how do you see the new infrastructure that is emerging in the field of security tokens? I mean, not those that are the traditional utility ones, but for example, a concrete example, Polymath, for example, would be infrastructure for security tokens. There are others as well, like T0 or, well, you name it. Thank you.
Great question. I believe that the security token wave is coming, that it's going to be powerful, that it's going to be huge, and that it's going to transform the way that we do business now. And I'll answer your question, I'll just give a little preamble. So when we put an Joshua Stein from Arbor has a really good metaphor. He tries to explain what's going to happen in the following way. When we took a letter and we put an electronic wrapper around the letter, became email, nobody anticipated, as you saw from the development, nobody anticipated forward, multiple addresses, attachments, chains, all these things. And by the way, it is now evidence in court. So when they first started this, nobody could envision the evolution that the electronic wrapper delivered to this simple document. When we put securities and we put the electronic wrappers around them, incredible things are going to happen also. And in terms of your question of infrastructure, I think the first hypothesis of taking the ERC20 platform, taking Ethereum, and putting a layer on top of it to deliver security tokens will not succeed. I think that we need primitives at the base layer that deal with identity, that deal with AML, and that deal with KYC. And think about it for a second. If I go from your chain or from your project in Polymath to your project in Securitize, to your project in Arbor, to your project at Security Token Partners, to your project at the Element Group, and I could go on and on and on and on, every one of those needs a new identity check. It needs a new KYC and a new AML inside of them. So until we make a different layer, a different foundational layer that has as its basic architecture these primitives, these foundational attributes, I think that we're going to have it'll be a steep climb in terms of implementing security token, but they will get done. This is innovative enough, and the numbers are small enough that I think that there will be some security tokens. Actually, there have been some security tokens, but let's just do some comparisons. In the analog world, in the pre-digital world of securities, Reg D applications in the US. Does everybody understand what a Reg D is? Yep. You do? Okay. So these Reg D, hello? Hello? Okay. The Reg D applications last year in 2017 raised $1.7 trillion. That's a lot of money. Last week, there was an announcement all over the blockchain world because one site had raised $30 million for a real estate project, or $10 million for blockchain capital. Those are not numbers in this space. Those are almost, done by hand and done by spreadsheet, very little automation. So those are the challenges that we have in developing the foundational infrastructure for security tokens. They will happen. They will happen in 2019. I think that the new blockchains that will come with these primitives are also in the works right now. Everybody's realizing that. Thanks for the question. That was a great question. Anybody else? We still have 6 minutes. Over here. Thank you very much for the engagement, by the way. I appreciate it.
Hello. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Just one question. What if the dApps never happen? Or what if instead we see blockchain as a service for a long time? So my point is there is something before the wallets.
Yes. Could be.
It is the need to have these wallets. So what we have to give the users a reason to want to own a wallet, which is adding the real most useful value from the blockchain technology into the actual marketplaces and websites, etc.?
So, great question, but I think that you need to divide the world in two. When you say that users don't need wallets, or we have to give them reasons to look at wallets, I think that is a good argument for you and I. Because I have my I live in the world where I have solutions. My payments are all electronic. I have enough credit cards. I don't need more financial services per se. I want them to be faster. I send money from my Citibank account to my Santander bank account in Spain. It takes 4 days. They charge me 2%. They made money on the killing. They made money on the exchange. I would like to avoid that. But it's a vitamin in this case. It's not a painkiller. But there's 2.5 billion people who every day, every month, none of us understand this. But think about this. If you don't have any financial services and you live in a cash economy, this is not cash, but it's a metaphor. If you live in a cash economy, you have to pay your cell phone every month. You have to get in line. Or, like most people do, you buy $2 worth, $1 worth, and you're constantly living in that cash economy. So, what happened to a construction worker when he received a cell phone? He became a plumber. He became a carpenter. He became a small business owner. Because for the first time, he could get off the building and go on the street and with his cell phone become a business owner. Before, the only option that he had was to have a location, a fixed line phone, and somebody to answer that. He couldn't make that jump from construction worker to plumber. So that man right now, that woman, that small business owner has a digital line, 6 billion of them. Everybody has one. When they are able to send payments to each other, because right now, when that plumber wants to buy something, he has to go to the store, give them cash, and receive the product. He doesn't have credit. He has no way of making a payment unless it's face-to-face. So the argument that you're making is very valid once everybody catches up. But I think that those 2.5 billion people that are unbanked, that are making $10, $20 a month, by the way, when you add them all, they represent more than half of the global telco dollar revenue volume. Because at $10 a head, times 2.5 billion, you get to a big number. The same thing is going to happen here. Financial services will develop. Financial services will develop for those people. And then we'll have to worry about how do we convince you and I to marginally transfer some of our financial activity into that wallet world. But thank you for the question. And with that, thank you very much. There's a 10 o'clock presentation. I'll be around, so anything you want to talk about, look forward to it.
Hey, Leonard, thank you very much.